What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel. And first things first, I want to quickly apologize for any voice issues in this video. That's because I'm finally getting over a cold that I got this past weekend. Well, it didn't start out completely as a cold, like this past Saturday. It was mainly my head and my back was killing me. Like, it felt like I was just getting punched over and over in my brain and my spine, and cold chills and body aches all over. It was bad. But then from Sunday until earlier this morning, I just been mostly dealing with a cold, like stuffy nose, coughing, and such. But, not coughing as much anymore, and my throat doesn't hurt anymore, just still tiny bit of stuffy nose. But for the most part, I'm back to almost 100%. I'd say I'm about like 80-85% good. But I felt good enough to come back and do a review for you guys. And today I am talking about the latest offering from Swallow the Sun, Shining. This came out on October 18th, this time on Century Media Records. And this is the band's 9th studio full-length overall. For those who don't know or haven't listened to Swallow the Sun for a while, of course, this is a band from Finland. They're known as melodic death doom / gothic metal, depending on the era in which you get into this band. I'd been a fan of this band primarily ever since When a Shadow is Forced into the Light came out in 2019, which I did review that when it came out, and it was a masterpiece, still is a masterpiece. And then I reviewed their last album that came out 3 years ago, Moonflowers, and I thought that was a beast of an album, and I still go back to songs off of that album to this day. Now, of course, going into this album, I was anticipating new Swallow the Sun since I'd become a pretty big fan. Maybe not as big of a fan as my buddy Horror Master, a.k.a. Ricky, but big fan nonetheless. Now, of course, one of the big things going in was their primary songwriter, Juha. He's primarily the rhythm guitarist, and of course he plays like keyboards and writes lyrics and writes majority of the songs. He was kind of one to change up some of the lyrical themes a bit on this album, like less about darkness and more towards hope, considering, you know, the whole concept behind When a Shadow's Forced into Light was all about his grief after he lost his longtime girlfriend, Aaliyah Stanbridge, from Trees of Eternity to cancer back in 2016, so he got into a very sad, depressive state and wrote that album. And then just when he thought he was about to feel better about himself, pandemic hit and it left him in isolation, and it kind of made him even more depressed but yet angry, and that was kind of the feeling of Moonflowers. Whereas now, he's kind of trying to cope with everything a lot better, and that does kind of get reflected upon on this album in terms of the atmosphere, the lyrical content. You still get plenty of darkness on here, but it's almost like it's trying to convey the message like there's no hope without pain, there is no joy without despair, like that kind of feeling. But we kick things off with Innocence Was Long Forgotten, right off the rip. Really cool melodic riff, but then comes probably the biggest issue that I have with this album, the drum sound. I am not a big fan of this, like, almost sterile pop drum sound, which there's a reason for that. It's because this album was produced by Dan Lancaster, who's primarily known for his work with bands like Muse and Bring Me the Horizon. Now, they wanted to go for like a more bigger, more lush sound for this album, which nothing wrong with going for a bigger and a more lush sound to your album. But to me, there is a fine line between trying to sound big and lush and going down the borderline pop terrain. Sometimes this album kind of crosses that line into borderline pop terrain, but once I kind of got used to the drum sound, even though I'm not a fan of it, it does get into like a big soaring melody. Like, soaring melodies come up here and there on certain songs, but then, like, I would say particularly here on this track, the track Melancholy, Velvet Chains, and Tonight Pain Believes. The big influence I'm kind of getting on this album is modern Catatonia, which, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love modern Catatonia. I mean, Sky Void of Stars was a big album, but I'm not sure if I want to hear modern Catatonia in Swallow the Sun. If I want to hear any Catatonia influence, I would prefer like their early stuff, like Dance of December Souls, Brave Murder Day, which was kind of one of the big influences on Swallow the Sun. If you've listened to their entire discography, you would know that that was like one of the big influences was early Catatonia. This at times sounds closer to like modern Catatonia, which I don't know if it quite fits Swallow the Sun, at least in my mind. But there are some cool chugging riffs that show up towards the end, as well as a nice shredding solo. But then you get into probably my personal favorite song on the album, What I Have Become. Feels very much close to classic Swallow the Sun, like heavy, evil, sinister riffs, big chugs, lots of doom, evil growls, like, Miko still can show that he's a great growler and screamer and a phenomenal singer too. Like, not knocking on his vocals. His vocals, I think, were like one of the big shining things on the album. And this song, I think, kind of showcases everything he can do. Musically, like I said, feels like classic Swallow the Sun. Huge chorus, big death metal triplet chugs, and really cool, tasty melody. Then with Melancholy, like I said, that modern Catatonia influence comes through, but you do get like a really big chorus that starts off with acoustics, and then it just goes right up to the stratosphere for the most part. Under the Moon and the Sun, this one was interesting because this one felt a little more towards groove, like it has a little bit more groove behind it with the riffs, but it also does really start bringing out more of that like uplifting, hopeful feel to the album. It really comes through on this song, so much so it actually reminds me a little bit of the band Soen. Like some of the riffs and the grooves kind of made me think of Soen a little bit. But I do like there was this like cool, whimsical piano and violin section before it gets into like black metal vocals and another tasty lead. Like, I will say the lead work on this album was mostly done for providing atmosphere to the songs, which that's typically how Swallow the Sun rolls when it comes down to leads and solos and the whole shebang. But then you get into another one of my favorites, the song Cold. Again, very much like classic Swallow the Sun, like big, evil melodic riffs with big, heavy, doomy bastard riffs and an evil sounding chorus. But also, I really like that there were multiple solos that pop up on this track. November Dust, this one definitely still has a lot of tropes of Swallow the Sun. It has this eerie piano intro, and then you get into like a lot of lead melodies on top of their famous melodic death doom sound. The vocals, for the most part, are clean, but more or less in the lower register to kind of give it a little bit of a gothic feel to it. And the chorus in itself is quite dark. And also, gorgeous harmonized lead pops up here, too. And then, of course, back to back with Velvet Chains and Tonight Pain Believes. Both of these are like ballad tracks. And Velvet Chains has a little more of like a somber feel, very much like typical Swallow the Sun. There's even female vocals. The song itself kind of reminds me a little bit of like Catatonia's Tonight's Decision whenever they went kind of more alternative rock. This is about what it kind of reminded me of. And then Tonight Pain Believes, again, it's mostly clean melodies and low clean vocals and more like Catatonia, like modern Catatonia riffs. Charcoal Sky, I will say, was like one of the big gems on this album. Triplet chugs, atonal riffs, heavy growl sections, and some of these riffs feel like Opeth a little bit. And I do like the chorus on here. Like, it's a clean chorus, but it's done pretty well. And then you get to the closing song, the title track, the longest song of the album at nearly 9 minutes. And this one definitely feels like the most hopeful song on the album, but in this case, it actually does work. The riffs have this more uplifting, kind of embracing feel behind them. Clean melodies. Of course, you still get some nice growl sections, beautiful acoustic guitars. It's soaring. Lots of great double bass drum work going on as well, and beautiful solos. And even briefly, there's a section where there's synths that almost give it a sci fi feel, and then some wonderful harmonies and more Opeth riffs. So this one kind of felt like the most progressive song of the album because it went for more lavish songwriting, and for being maybe the one song that had that like uplifting feel to it actually does work. So yeah, this album to me was just lots of peaks and valleys, but not a whole lot of peaks come up here. Like, really, the main songs that stood out to me are the ones that felt like typical Swallow the Sun. Like, you kind of wanted to hear more of what they're all about on songs like What I Have Become, Cold, Charcoal Sky. And granted, a couple of songs that they experimented with, like the title track and Under the Moon and the Sun, those songs definitely worked in their own right. Same with November Dust, but there are still moments within those experimental songs where I'm just kind of like, I was expecting a little more heaviness or a little more heft behind the songwriting or even in the lyrical content. And then the majority of the rest of the album, I just thought was not quite something I can get into personally. And then, of course, the big issue, the production just felt a little too poppy, a little too polished, and not enough grit. And for those reasons, I am going to give this a 3 out of 5. It's still good, like, there's still good moments on here. It's honestly, this album's closer to a 2.5 than a 3.5 when it comes down to the 3 I'm giving it. But I'm giving it a 3 because the songs I liked are actually still really good, but the rest of the album just kind of falls flat to me because it didn't seem like a smooth enough album to me. Like, the flow's a little bit off at times. Also, I felt like some of the songs that they were going for might have been a little bit too short, because most of these songs are like in the 4.5 minute range, whereas in the past they would go 5 and beyond. To me, it might sound like they're trying to go for a bit of mainstream appeal a little bit, which nothing wrong with that, but I think it could have been approached a little bit better. But I mainly give it a 3 because the songs I liked were very, very strong. It's just, maybe they'll learn from their mistakes, and maybe the next album they'll kind of retune everything and kind of get things back on track to where we were on the past few albums, because those albums were massive. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think of Swallow the Sun Shining? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But until next time, keep your horns high and your dreams wet.
Thank you for your patronage.